Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing at the very edge of a world untouched by human hands. The air is thick here, not unpleasant, but heavy, warm, and almost sweet with moisture, as though the very breath of the earth lingers on your skin. Each inhale is slow and deliberate, filled with the fragrance of mosses, damp soil, and the green perfume of towering ferns that rise above you like the pillars of some living cathedral. Their immense fronds spread outward and upward, catching the dappled glow of sunlight that trickles through the mist, painting the swamp in shifting shades of emerald and gold. The silence is never truly silent. Beneath the stillness lies a symphony of subtle sounds, the dripping of water as it falls from broad fern leaves into quiet pools, the faint stir of unseen wings as insects glide through humid air, the creak of ancient plants swaying against one another like the beams of an old ship groaning in the wind. It is a world alive, not with noise, but with presence, a hushed murmur, as though the land itself is breathing, exhaling through every reed, every pool, every drifting spore. Above you, massive dragonflies hover with wings that gleam like sheets of stained glass, shimmering as they tilt and pivot in the golden haze. Their bodies, longer than your hand could stretch, hum softly, a low thrum that becomes part of the living air. Near the roots of giant club mosses, millipedes as long as a child's arm crawl slowly across the damp soil, their countless legs moving in hypnotic waves. Every creature here is larger, stranger, yet somehow perfectly at home in this lush, oxygen-rich world. And there at the water's edge, something stirs, subtle at first, just the ripple of mud disturbed by weight. A shape emerges from the reeds, broad, muscular, covered in smooth, glistening skin mottled in shades of green and brown. A head rises, heavy and deliberate, its eyes wide and luminous, glistening like dark jewels that catch the faint shimmer of daylight. The creature pauses, chest swelling as it draws in the thick, humid air with a slow gulp, its primitive lungs straining but steady. This is no ordinary fish, yet it carries within its body the memory of water. Its fins, strong and lobe-like, are not just for swimming anymore, they press into the mud like the awkward steps of a pioneer. It is an amphibian, one of the first of its kind, a creature that lives in two worlds and fully belongs to neither. The swamp around it is a kingdom both enchanting and strange. Pools shimmer with clusters of eggs, translucent spheres that glisten like pearls beneath the surface. From them, tadpoles flicker to life, tiny bodies darting through the shallows in bursts of silver movement. Spores drift lazily through the air, invisible threads weaving the fabric of this ancient forest. Sunlight shifts constantly, filtered through mist and leaves, dappling the water in soft mosaics of light and shadow. Every inch of this world whispers of beginnings, of a time when life was writing its story across a new page of the earth. And yet there is no rush here. Life unfolds with patience. Amphibians linger half in the water, half on the shore, resting quietly beneath the ferns, their sides rising and falling slowly as though in meditation. Theirs is a story not of conquest, but of presence, of gentle persistence, of cautious exploration, of survival written in stillness and silence. They are pioneers, but not in the way of heroes. They are pioneers in the way of small steps, soft breaths, and the courage to exist in the space between two worlds. This is the age of amphibians, a chapter not only of growth, but of possibility, of thresholds crossed and boundaries blurred. Here in the damp air, in the chorus of unseen voices in the night, the future of vertebrate life is quietly taking shape. These creatures, humble in their beginnings, will give rise to entire lineages that one day shape the earth. But for now, they simply rest, breathe, and move with slow certainty beneath the shelter of ancient leaves. So let us begin this journey together as travelers in time. Let us wander beneath the emerald canopies of the Carboniferous, our feet sinking gently into the spongy earth. Let us follow the winding streams, hear the low croak of voices calling across the still water, and imagine ourselves seated at the water's edge, watching those first amphibians peer back at us with eyes both ancient and familiar. The air is warm, the swamp alive, and the whispers of a new age linger all around us. Here at the edge of land and water, the story unfolds, the story of the age of amphibians. The age of amphibians begins in a world transformed. Imagine walking into a forest unlike any you have ever known, a world where trees do not bear flowers, where no birds call from the branches, where no mammals scurry in the shadows. Instead, the air is saturated with the breath of ancient plants, each one towering and strange, their forms both alien and familiar. This is the Carboniferous world, a planet clothed in green. Towering lycophytes rise like pillars, some soaring more than 100 feet into the air. Their trunks are not rough bark, but patterned with diamond-shaped scars where leaves once grew, as though the trees themselves have been stitched together from living scales. Around them, massive horsetails thrust upward, straight and tall, their segmented stalks crowned with whorls of spindly leaves that stretch outward like the spokes of a wheel. Ferns, immense, sprawling ferns, unfurl their fronds as wide as sails, catching the sunlight and layering the swamp in dappled shade. Beneath these giants, the ground is a mosaic of mosses, fungi, and tangled roots that weave into soft carpets of life. The air itself feels alive. It is thick with oxygen, far richer than the air you breathe today. Each inhale feels almost intoxicating, as if the forest itself has opened its lungs to share its vitality with you. Spores drift like fine golden dust through beams of light, dancing lazily in the humid air, swirling and settling as though time itself has slowed. Every step sinks softly into the damp earth, springy with the weight of countless fallen leaves and decomposing plants, a living bed of memory and renewal. Above the canopy is a woven ceiling of green. Shafts of sunlight pierce through in scattered beams, creating small sanctuaries of brightness where dragonflies, enormous and shimmering, hover with wings as broad as a raven's. Their bodies glint with metallic hues of blue and copper as they tilt and glide, hunting silently in the air. Between trunks, the low hum of insects is constant, not the fleeting buzz of modern life, but a deep, resonant chorus, a steady song that seems to vibrate in the very bones of the swamp. And all around, water glimmers. Pools spread between roots like mirrors of the sky, catching reflections of green fronds above. Streams coil lazily, their banks lined with reeds and club mosses, their surfaces broken only by the ripple of something stirring beneath. The swamp is not a landscape of separations, but of blending water and land entwined, one flowing into the other. It is in these borderlands, in the soft, wet edges of rivers and ponds, that a new story is being written. If you linger here long enough, sitting quietly in the shade, you will begin to notice the rhythm of this ancient world. The slow dripping of rainwater from one leaf to another, the rustle of spores shaken free with the slightest touch of breeze, the subtle sigh of the swamp as clouds gather above, shading the forest in cool shadows. This is a place of patience, a place that invites you to rest, to breathe with it, to match your own heartbeat to the pulse of green that surrounds you. And within this green-breathing world, life is abundant. Amphibians move cautiously through the undergrowth, their bodies glistening with moisture, their movements slow but deliberate. They rest on patches of moss, eyes half-closed, skin drinking in the humid air. They slip into shallow pools, disappearing into shadows only to re-emerge moments later, their broad heads breaking the surface like drifting logs come to life. They are part of the forest, as much as the towering lycophytes or the drifting spores, woven into the tapestry of this living world. This is the stage upon which the age of amphibians will unfold, a world of endless green, of towering forests and whispering swamps. A world where air is richer, life is larger, and every breath feels heavy with possibility. The amphibians did not arrive here to conquer, but to belong, to find their place in a world that seemed to have been waiting for them all along. And as they settled among the ferns and reeds, the world itself seemed to lean closer, breathing with them, whispering softly through every leaf and shadow, "This is your time." Beneath the still waters of ancient rivers and lagoons, life teemed in quiet abundance. The water was warm, sluggish in its movement, thick with the presence of plants that swayed in the currents like underwater meadows. Long stalks of reeds reached upward, their tips breaking the surface, while mats of algae floated lazily, painting the water's skin in shades of green. Here, among the tangled roots and drifting shadows, lived a peculiar kind of fish, one whose story would forever change the course of life on Earth. They were lobe-finned fish, broad-bodied and muscular, with fins unlike the delicate rays of other swimmers. Instead of thin, flexible fans, their fins were thick and strong, supported by bones and muscles that could push against mud and sand. Their bodies gleamed with scales that caught flashes of light as they moved, shimmering like living armor beneath the surface. Their eyes, set high on their heads, peered upward, always watching the edge where water met the open air. These creatures were dreamers, though they did not know it. Their fins allowed them to glide through shallow waters where others could not venture, where the mud was thick and the air closed. When droughts came, when ponds shrank and streams turned to ribbons, they were the ones who lingered longest in the shallows, pressing their bodies against damp earth, gulping at the surface with lungs as well as gills. In their bodies was written a possibility, a design that whispered of futures not yet realized. Imagine lying at the edge of such a pool, your chin resting on your folded arms as you gaze into the shallows. You would see them resting there, half submerged, their broad fins splayed out on the soft floor like primitive limbs. Occasionally, one would push itself forward, awkward and slow, stirring up silt that clouded the water like drifting smoke. Another might raise its head above the surface, mouth opening to gulp a breath of swampy air, then settling back down with a ripple that spreads in widening circles. The swamp hummed around them, dragonflies hovering, spores drifting, amphibians just beginning to stir in the reeds, but these fish were the quiet architects of what was to come. Their lives were patient, marked not by sudden leaps but by countless small moments, the pressure of mud beneath their fins, the faint taste of air filling their lungs, the constant struggle of surviving between water and land. They were creatures of in-between places, comfortable in neither, yet belonging to both. Over generations, their fins grew stronger, their bodies more capable of bearing weight, their lungs more efficient at drawing breath from the heavy air. Slowly, they learned the language of two worlds. Beneath the water, they swam with the ease of their ancestors, muscles rippling in smooth arcs. On the edges, they pushed forward, experimenting with each hesitant press of fin against mud, each breath of damp oxygen that burned yet sustained them. Their eyes watched both the rippling surface and the world beyond, as though drawn toward something greater, something waiting. In the stillness of evening, when the swamp darkened and mist clung to the reeds, you might picture one of these dreamers resting half in the water, half on the land. The light of a setting sun, filtered through the towering ferns, paints its scales in fire and shadow. Its body is still, but its presence speaks volumes. In that quiet moment, it does not yet know what it represents, the beginning of a journey, the bridge between seas and forests, the ancestor of all who would one day walk upon the earth. The lobe-finned fish lived not as conquerors, but as survivors, as explorers of necessity. Yet in their struggle, they opened a doorway. They showed that water was not the only home, that air could be breathed, that land could be touched. And in those hesitant steps and awkward breaths, they dreamed of a future their descendants would one day claim. They were the dreamers of the Paleozoic, silent, patient, and unknowing. But because of them, the world was preparing to change. The line between water and land has always been more than a boundary. It is a threshold, a doorway. For untold eons, the world above the waves had remained silent, untouched by the pulse of vertebrate life. Forests grew and whispered in the humid air, dragonflies soared between the trunks, and the swamps breathed in great cycles of mist and rain. But no creature with a backbone had ever set foot upon its soft earth. That silence was about to break. Along the shallows of a swampy lagoon, one creature stirs. Its body is broad and heavy, glistening with moisture. Its fins are not the flimsy paddles of ordinary fish, but strong, lobed limbs that end in the faint beginnings of digits. This is Tiktaalik, or perhaps something much like it, one of the pioneers of a new world. With slow determination, it presses its fins against the mud, testing, straining, as if weighing the very idea of land. Each push sinks slightly, the mud giving way beneath its weight, but the creature steadies itself. Its body rises, chest heaving as it gulps a breath of air into primitive lungs. The air is thick, heavy with humidity, richer in oxygen than the waters it leaves behind. It burns at first like fire in its chest, but it holds that breath, savoring it. Its eyes blink against the glare of the open world, a brightness unfiltered by water. The swamp stretches before it, green and endless, alive with shadows and sound. It hesitates as though aware of the enormity of this moment, and then it shifts its weight forward. One fin presses against the soil, followed by another. The first true step has been taken. Imagine being there to witness it. The silence of the swamp was broken only by the soft slap of wet skin against earth, the faint squelch of mud beneath ancient limbs. The creature moves slowly, awkwardly, like a child learning to walk. Each step is a test, a gamble, a defiance of the deep that birthed it. Yet there is grace in its struggle, a sense of determination written into every heave, every pause, every breath drawn from the open air. Around it, the forest seems to lean closer. Ferns sway gently, their fronds brushing one another in whispers. Spores drift down like pale snow, settling on the creature's damp skin. The air hums with insects, massive and unafraid, their wings catching glints of fading sunlight. The world does not stop to honor this first journey, yet something profound has shifted. Life has crossed a boundary it can never fully retreat from. For now, these pioneers remain close to the water. They cannot stray far, their skins still thirst for moisture, their eggs still demand the safety of pools. The land is a place of promise, but also of danger. Without the comfort of buoyant water, their bodies sag heavily, every movement a labor. Yet they persist, venturing onto fallen logs, crawling across reeds, testing their strength against gravity itself. Each day they push a little further, claiming inches of land with their tentative exploration. It is not the conquest they seek, it is survival. Droughts shrink pools, rivers dry into stagnant ponds, and in these moments the ability to breathe air and shuffle across mud means life or death. Necessity drives them forward, but possibility follows close behind. For every step taken, the land becomes less alien, less impossible. It becomes a place where food waits in abundance, where insects swarm unchallenged, where the forest floor holds shelter for those brave enough to crawl upon it. The first steps on soil were not grand, not triumphant. They were awkward, halting, uncertain, but they were enough. Each press of limb against mud was a promise written into the fabric of life, a promise that one day vertebrates would roam the forests, climb the trees, and shape the very destiny of Earth. Amphibians would inherit this promise, carrying it forward with every breath, every leap, every whispering call in the night. And so, with a gulp of air and the press of damp skin against ancient Earth, the story of land vertebrates begins. The silence above the water has been broken, and the world will never be the same. The amphibians of this ancient world lived poised between two realms. In the water, they were at home, weightless, supported by the currents, their limbs moving with a gentle grace. Yet when they lifted their broad heads above the surface and pulled air into their lungs, they entered a new dimension of existence. Breathing water was a memory, breathing air was a promise. And so, their lives became a song sung in two verses, one in liquid silence, one in the heavy breath of the swamp's atmosphere. Picture a wide, shallow pool at dusk, its surface darkening to glass as the sun sinks low behind the fern canopy. The water ripples with small movements, a tail flick, a soft splash, the faint circles spreading from a creature breaking the surface. A head emerges, eyes blinking in the twilight. Its wide mouth opens in a slow yawn, and with a subtle heave of its sides, it gulps the air. The sound is soft, almost unnoticed, but it is a declaration. This creature has claimed a place in two worlds. The first breaths of air were not easy. Lungs, primitive and unrefined, struggled at times to draw enough oxygen. Yet the swamp itself, rich with green abundance, held air thick and potent. To breathe it was to taste life itself, humid, dense, almost syrupy in its richness. Amphibians lingered at the edge of pools, slipping between breaths of water and gulps of air, their bodies learning, adjusting, mastering the rhythm of this duality. By day they swam with the power of their ancestors, tails sweeping through reeds, limbs pressing into the silt. But as the sun climbed high, warming the waters until oxygen thinned, they turned to the sky above. Breaking the surface, they drew in air, filling their lungs with sustenance no gill could provide. In this way, they survived where others faltered. Their ability to cross between breathing worlds became their strength, their quiet triumph. At night, when the swamp grew hushed and the mist thickened, their songs began. They were not the clear trills and croaks we hear from frogs today, but low, resonant murmurs, the ancient beginnings of calls across the darkness. From one pool to another, from reed bed to fern shadow, voices rose, not words, but sounds of presence, of belonging. The swamps became alive with these ancient songs, carried softly on the damp night air, echoes of a new way of being. Imagine sitting at the edge of a pond, listening. The water reflects the glow of the moon, rippled by the faintest movement of amphibians stirring. You hear the hush of air drawn into lungs, a gentle rhythm like the tide. You hear the low hum of calls weaving together, a primitive chorus drifting over the still water. The night is alive, yet peaceful, every sound a reassurance that life is thriving in this new balance. It is a fragile harmony, this dual existence. Too far from water, and their skins dry, their eggs desiccate, their lives unravel. Too deep into water, and they risk suffocation where oxygen runs thin. And so amphibians move with patience, guided by instinct, always returning to the moist embrace of pools, yet always lifting their heads to the sky. They do not belong wholly to either realm, but in their in-between state, they carve a space for themselves, unlike any that came before. The songs of water and air are not just their own, but the voice of life itself, shifting, adapting, reaching for more. With every gulp of swampy breath, with every ripple stirred by their limbs, amphibians declared that survival was not bound to one world. Life could bridge divides. It could weave two realms into one melody. And in that melody, whispered across humid nights and sung in damp forests, the age of amphibians found its rhythm. A song of patience, of balance, of quiet power, carried on the breath of creatures who taught the earth to breathe in new ways. In the shadow of the towering swamp forests, where ferns stretched like sails and horsetails climbed skyward, lived creatures that seemed almost mythical in their size. The amphibians of this age were not the small, delicate frogs and salamanders we know today. They were giants, heavy, broad, and long-bodied, their forms commanding the shallow waters and reed-filled banks. Some reached lengths of 2, 3, even 4 meters, sprawling across mudflats like living relics of an earlier world. They were the quiet lords of the marsh, neither swift nor sleek, but immense in their presence. Imagine walking along the edge of a carboniferous swamp. The air is dense, the soil spongy beneath your feet, and the sound of insects thrums in the background like a steady drumbeat. A hush falls over the reeds as something moves in the water nearby. Slowly, a shape emerges, a massive head, wide and flat, studded with eyes that glisten like pools of dark amber. A body follows, thick and muscular, each limb pressing heavily into the mud as it drags itself forward. Its skin gleams with moisture, patterned in mottled greens and browns that blend into the swamp's shifting shadows. This is Ichthyostega, or perhaps Acanthostega, names we have given to the earliest great amphibians. To their world, they were simply the first of their kind. These giants lived lives of patience. They did not dart or dash. They moved with slow certainty, conserving energy, their massive frames designed more for stability than speed. In the shallows, they rested for long hours, bodies half submerged, their eyes breaking the water's surface like the knotted roots of fallen trees. From such stillness, they watched and waited, every ripple, every flicker of movement beneath the water a signal of opportunity. When prey drifted too close, fish, smaller amphibians, or perhaps an insect struggling at the water's edge, they lunged with sudden power, jaws snapping shut in a spray of water and mud. Then, just as quickly, they settled back into silence, their meal consumed in slow gulps, their patience restored. To see one of these creatures up close would have been to witness the raw persistence of life itself. Their skin was slick, glistening with the sheen of swamp humidity. Their limbs, though clumsy on land, were thick and strong, able to haul their bulk from water to shore with quiet determination. Their eyes, always watchful, reflected the dappled light of the forest canopy above. In them, one might glimpse something both alien and familiar, the gaze of a creature that belonged to two worlds at once. The marshland giants were not predators alone. They were symbols of a new kind of life. They represented what could be achieved when necessity drove innovation, when survival demanded more than gills and fins. Their lungs drew in the heavy air, their limbs pressed into damp earth, and their lives unfolded in the gentle borderlands where land and water kissed. They did not need to conquer the forests. Their reign was in the swamps, in the half-lit places where reeds swayed and shadows pooled. At dusk, when the air cooled slightly and the mist began to rise, the marshlands came alive with their presence. You might hear the slow splash of a giant amphibian moving from one pool to another, its body brushing against reeds, sending ripples outward in widening circles. You might glimpse its silhouette in the fading light, a hulking form slipping quietly into deeper water. The night would embrace it, hiding its size, leaving only the memory of its presence in the stirred mud and broken stillness. Though immense, these amphibians were never monsters. They were gentle giants, their existence shaped not by dominance but by balance. They hunted, yes, but they also rested, basked, and lingered in the cozy embrace of the swamps. Their world was one of stillness as much as action, of patience as much as survival. In them, life had created not only pioneers, but guardians and keepers of a green, humid kingdom that breathed with them. The marshland giants remind us that size was not their greatest achievement. It was their persistence, their ability to live fully in a world that demanded compromise. They carried the weight of both water and land upon their shoulders and moved forward slowly, quietly, but undeniably. They were the giants of the marsh, steady, deliberate, and unforgettable. As the sun sinks low beyond the fern-canopied horizon, the swamps of the Carboniferous enter a different kind of life. The heat of day softens, the air cools just enough to let the mist thicken, and shadows stretch long across the forest floor. The swamp exhales with twilight, releasing a breath of moisture that drifts like smoke, winding through reeds and tree trunks. It is the hour of transformation, when light fades into quiet darkness and the hidden world awakens. The forest glows in fading hues of gold and green, then dims into deep, velvety blues. Pools of still water catch the last threads of sunlight, shimmering briefly before settling into mirrors of dusk. The canopy above is hushed, fronds swaying gently, their silhouettes etched in dark lace against the sky. In the dim light, the swamp becomes a place of mystery, each shadow a story waiting to unfold. The amphibians stir with the coolness of evening. Broad heads rise from water, glistening with droplets that shimmer like jewels. Eyes peer above the surface, glassy and alert, reflecting the faint glow of twilight. One by one, they climb onto mossy banks, their heavy bodies pressing into the damp earth with slow, deliberate movements. They are creatures of patience, conserving energy during the heat of day, now ready to roam beneath the cover of darkness. Their skin, moist and sensitive, drinks in the night air like a sponge. Each breath, drawn carefully through primitive lungs, feels easier now, the cool dampness soothing after the heavy warmth of midday. They linger in the half-light, half in water, half on land, balanced at the border of two worlds as always, but now cloaked in the safety of shadows. From the stillness, sound begins to rise. A low, resonant hum carries across the swamp, the voices of amphibians calling into the night. Their songs are not the clear trills of modern frogs, but deeper, more primal notes, soft and pulsing like the beat of a distant drum. One voice calls, then another answers until the swamp hums with overlapping tones. The forest becomes a living chorus, woven of sound and silence, each note drifting across pools and reeds, echoing into the mist. The air itself is alive. Insects buzz and flicker, wings catching glimmers of moonlight. Some shine faintly with bioluminescent glows, brief sparks of greenish light that hover and fade. Dragonflies, massive and silent, sweep low above the water, their wings stirring the mist in slow spirals. A giant millipede shifts among the roots, its countless legs rustling like whispers against the damp soil. Every movement, every sound adds to the symphony of night. The swamp at night is not frightening, but enchanting. It is a place of hushed wonder, of unseen presences felt more than seen. Imagine sitting on a mossy log, your hands resting on the damp wood, listening. The mist curls around you, cool and soft. The calls of amphibians drift across the dark, rising and falling like waves. The steady hum of insects fills the air, a lullaby of the deep past. The water at your feet ripples as a large amphibian slips beneath the surface, its body disappearing into liquid shadow. The swamp does not sleep. It breathes in rhythms older than memory. Above, the sky clears. Through gaps in the towering fronds, stars pierce the darkness. The Milky Way arches overhead, its river of light mirrored faintly in the pools below. Moonlight filters through the mist, laying silver trails across the water, painting amphibians in pale light as they emerge from shadows to feed, to call, to rest. The night belongs to them. Here in the hush of darkness, amphibians reign not with speed or strength, but with presence. They are part of the swamp's rhythm, voices in its chorus, shadows in its mist. They move slowly, deliberately, blending into the world around them, as if the night itself carries them forward. Their giants' forms may fade into darkness, but their songs endure, threading the swamp with notes of belonging. Nightfall in the Carboniferous swamp is not an end, but a beginning, a time of voices, of movements unseen, of lives unfolding quietly beneath the moon. It is a world that hums with ancient music, a world that feels eternal, timeless, alive in every breath. And at its heart are the amphibians, whispering their presence into the night, guardians of the shadows, dreamers of the dark. Beneath the moonlit canopy, the swamp does not rest. It waits. Each pool, each stream, each stretch of reed-filled shallows is alive with movement too subtle for the untrained eye. Water striders ripple the surface. Insects flicker low to the ground, their wings shimmering faintly in the damp night air. Tadpoles dart like shadows, tiny streaks of silver beneath the floating mats of algae. Every ripple is a signal, every sound a story. And in the heart of this world, crouched in silence, lies the amphibian, a predator built not for speed, but for patience. It rests half-submerged, its body blending so perfectly with its surroundings that you might mistake it for a fallen log or a mound of reeds. Its skin, mottled in earthy greens and deep browns, glistens faintly where moonlight slips through the mist. Its eyes, wide and unblinking, break the water's surface, reflecting the pale glow of the night. Stillness is its strategy. Motion is its enemy. In patience, it thrives. For hours, it may not move at all. Its broad head rests against the mud, nostrils just above the surface, lungs drawing in slow, deliberate breaths. Beneath the water, its limbs press lightly into the silt, ready but relaxed. Around it, life carries on, unaware of the danger hidden in plain sight. Small fish swim too close, insects skim across the water, even smaller amphibians drift near the edge. The predator watches all, unhurried, waiting for the moment when the world offers opportunity. To the amphibian, hunting is not a chase but an art of timing. It does not waste its strength in bursts of frenzy. It conserves, letting the swamp itself bring prey to its side. It knows the rhythm of the night, the way insects gather at certain pools, the way tadpoles hover in warm shallows, the way creatures follow the currents without knowing what waits in the shadows. In this rhythm, the amphibian waits, silent as stone, alive only in its eyes. Then without warning, the stillness breaks. A ripple passes too near. A fish glides within reach, scales flashing briefly in moonlight. The predator strikes with sudden violence, jaws snapping forward in a spray of water and mud. The speed is shocking after such stillness, a single blur of motion followed by silence once more. The prey is caught, swallowed whole in a slow, steady gulp. Ripples fade outward, and the swamp resumes its quiet song. Such moments are not rare, but neither are they constant. The amphibian will wait again, sometimes for hours, sometimes through the entire night, content to remain as shadow as presence. Its body is a sculpture of patience, conserving energy in a world where survival demands endurance. Unlike later predators, the swift reptiles, the sharp-clawed hunters of future ages, the amphibians rule with subtlety, with the wisdom of waiting. Imagine yourself crouched near the reeds, hidden in mist, watching this silent hunt. You hear the hum of insects all around, the occasional splash of something unseen in deeper water, the low chorus of amphibian calls in the distance. And there, just a few feet away, you witness the stillness of a predator that is not frightening but mesmerizing. Its patience is its strength, its silence its weapon. In its eyes gleams not malice, but necessity, the ancient rhythm of predator and prey carried out in the gentlest of violence. This is the life of the amphibian hunter, not dramatic chases, not roaring power, but ripples and silence, patience and sudden movement. It is a style of hunting perfectly matched to the swamp itself, a landscape of shadows and whispers. In the age of amphibians, to be a predator was to master the art of waiting, to know that the swamp would provide, if only one remained still long enough to listen, to watch, to strike when the time was right. And so, through the long nights of the Carboniferous, amphibians fed not by chasing, but by blending, not by rushing, but by lingering. Their patience was their survival, their silence their dominion. They were predators not of fearsome spectacle, but of quiet inevitability, and in their stillness, the swamp itself seemed to watch and wait alongside them. The amphibians were not solitary rulers of their world. Around them, in the still waters and humid forests, countless other creatures thrived, each playing a part in the great symphony of the Carboniferous. To walk among the swamps of this age, or even to simply sit and listen, was to find oneself surrounded not just by amphibians, but by a living, buzzing, crawling, fluttering kingdom. These companions of the marsh, though often smaller, were no less remarkable. Above the pools, the air itself was alive. Dragonflies with wingspans of nearly 2 feet drifted lazily between the shafts of sunlight, their transparent wings shimmering like sheets of colored glass. They hovered with perfect control, tilting forward, back, and side to side, surveying the swamp from above like watchful sentinels. When they caught sight of smaller insects, they lunged in sudden bursts of speed, snapping their prey from the air before resuming their slow, patient patrols. To amphibians resting in the reeds, these dragonflies were both companions and competitors, their presence a constant reminder of a sky that belonged to wings. Closer to the ground, the world was just as strange. Giant millipedes, some as long as a grown human, trundled slowly across the damp forest floor, their countless legs rippling in mesmerizing waves of motion. They fed on fallen plant matter, their jaws chewing steadily through the rich carpet of leaves and moss that blanketed the swamp. Their presence was not threatening, but comforting. Gentle giants of the undergrowth, endlessly patient, endlessly hungry, turning decay into life. Amphibians often shared burrows and shadows with these great crawlers, the two species inhabiting the same logs and roots without conflict, each absorbed in their quiet rhythms of existence. Beetles scurried beneath fallen branches, their armored bodies glinting as they disappeared into the damp soil. Crickets and roaches added their voices to the swamp's constant hum, their wings rasping in rhythms that rose and fell like music. Insects swarmed near pools, filling the air with flashes of wings and the low buzz of countless tiny lives. Amphibians, ever patient, often sat among them, their wide mouths snapping open with sudden efficiency, feeding in silence while the air shimmered with abundance. The water too teemed with life. Schools of fish darted through the reeds, their bodies glistening in silver arcs. Tadpoles swam in clusters near the edges, flicking their tails in playful bursts, unaware that many of their number would never grow to adulthood. Tiny crustaceans drifted like drifting specks of glass, carried by currents and eddies. The pools of the Carboniferous were not still, but alive, every ripple a signal of countless stories unfolding beneath the surface. At night, the companions of the marsh transformed the swamp into a different kind of theater. Fireflies glowed faintly in the mist, their bioluminescent signals blinking in soft rhythms across the darkness. The air pulsed with light, a gentle constellation mirrored among the reeds. Crickets sang their steady songs, while dragonflies, heavy from the day, settled on broad leaves, their wings folding like panes of glass over their bodies. Millipedes coiled beneath logs, their countless legs tucked close, while beetles clicked softly as they burrowed into the soil. Around them, amphibians called into the night, their low, resonant voices weaving into this chorus of sound and light. Imagine yourself there, seated against the trunk of a massive lycophyte, your hands brushing the damp moss that coats its base. All around, the swamp hums and shifts with life. A giant dragonfly hovers so close you can hear the faint whir of its wings, a sound both delicate and powerful. A millipede the length of your arm crawls slowly past, unhurried, each leg moving in a perfect rhythm. The water at your feet stirs as tadpoles dart past, their tiny bodies glistening in the moonlight. Above, the air glows with fireflies, tiny stars born of earth. You are not alone here. You are surrounded by companions, each one a reminder that this ancient world thrived not in solitude, but in abundance. The age of amphibians was never just about the amphibians themselves. It was about the world they inhabited, a world where insects ruled the skies, millipedes wandered the forest floors, and every pool was alive with movement. Together, these companions wove the tapestry of life, a network of relationships and rhythms that made the swamps more than just a backdrop. They made it a kingdom, alive and breathing in every direction, every shadow, every heartbeat of the night. Beneath the still waters of Carboniferous swamps, hidden among reeds and floating mats of algae, life began in clusters of shimmering pearls. Amphibian eggs, hundreds at a time, rested in the shallows, their translucent casings catching glimmers of light as if they were beads of glass strung together on the current. Each one was fragile, a tiny globe of possibility, floating in a world both nurturing and perilous. Within those soft shells, tiny lives stirred. Embryos shifted, their bodies no larger than pinpricks of movement, their forms barely visible against the gentle green glow of the swamp. And then, with time and patience, they hatched. From the eggs emerged tadpoles, delicate, flickering shapes that darted into the water with tails that glistened like threads of silver. They were small, defenseless, and yet brimming with energy, carried into the world with a restlessness that belied their size. The tadpoles lived first as children of the water, their bodies built for swimming, their gills brushing against the currents as they breathed in oxygen from the swamp itself. They clustered together near the safety of reeds and stones, where shadows offered shelter and algae offered food. In the soft warmth of the shallow pools, they flicked their tails in sudden bursts, darting forward before pausing, suspended in the water like tiny notes in an unseen song. Their world was both cozy and dangerous. Insects hovered above the surface, casting shadows that drew the tadpole's gaze. Fish darted through the reeds, hungry and swift, turning moments of stillness into sudden chaos. Even larger amphibians, kin in form but not in mercy, sometimes hunted in these same pools, their wide mouths snapping at tadpoles too slow to flee. Yet still, the young persisted. For every loss, many more remained, their tails flicking, their tiny mouths grazing, their bodies growing day by day. As weeks passed, changes stirred within them. Small limbs budded from their sides, first the faintest swellings, then tiny, wriggling legs that pressed against the water as if testing a future not yet realized. Their gills began to fade, lungs stirring to life within their fragile chests. The tadpoles began to gulp at the surface, awkwardly, uncertainly, as if the air itself were an unfamiliar food they were learning to taste. Each breath was clumsy, but with each attempt they grew stronger, more certain. Imagine crouching beside a shallow pond, your fingers trailing lightly through the water. All around your hand, tadpoles swarm in miniature clouds, their bodies brushing softly against your skin as they flick past. You watch as one, slightly larger than the others, kicks with both tail and tiny legs, propelling itself forward in bursts that speak of something greater. Another rises to the surface, mouth breaking the stillness in a soft gulp of air before slipping back into shadow. These are small moments, quiet and easily overlooked, but within them lies the story of life's greatest transition. One by one, the tadpoles shed their tails, their bodies reshaping, their limbs lengthening and strengthening. The water that once defined them becomes merely the beginning. They climb reeds, rest on stones, crawl clumsily onto damp moss at the pool's edge. The first breaths of air sting their lungs, but they endure, adjusting as their bodies demand it. What once was a fragile tadpole is now a young amphibian, its skin slick with moisture, its gaze wide and curious, its body poised between water and land. The journey from egg to tadpole to adult was not only a cycle of survival, but a story of transformation written into every amphibian lineage. It was a reminder that their lives, like the swamps they inhabited, existed in balance between two worlds. In water, they began. On land, they found possibility. Each generation renewed the story, countless tadpoles flicking their tails in the warm shallows, countless young rising from ponds into the green embrace of the forests. The tadpole's journey is the most tender of amphibian stories, a story of beginnings, of vulnerability, and of transformation. And in the humid, oxygen-rich swamps of the Carboniferous, it played out endlessly, generation after generation, like a whispered refrain in the great song of the age of amphibians. The Carboniferous world was a kingdom of water and green, but its lifeblood did not flow only in rivers and swamps. It fell from the skies. Rain was not an interruption here, not an inconvenience, as we sometimes think of it today. It was the rhythm of the land, the pulse of renewal that made the amphibians' world thrive. Every drop was a note in the endless music of the age of amphibians. Clouds gathered often above the ancient forests, swollen and gray, their bellies heavy with moisture drawn from oceans and rivers far beyond. In the stillness before the storm, the swamp held its breath. The air grew dense and electric, the insects quieted their songs, and even the broad fronds of ferns seemed to lean in expectation. Then, with a sigh that echoed across the canopy, the first drops fell fat, heavy, splashing onto leaves and pooling in moss. Soon, the rain came in torrents, sheets of water cascading through the green, turning every frond and trunk into a gleaming sculpture of wetness. For amphibians, these storms were more than weather. They were life itself. The eggs resting in shallow pools were refreshed by the rain's touch, their fragile membranes strengthened by the cool, cleansing flow. Tadpoles swam eagerly into the new streams formed by runoff, exploring fresh channels of water that spread across the forest floor. Adult amphibians, their skins thirsty for moisture, emerged from burrows and shaded shelters to sit beneath the falling rain, drinking it in not only through their mouths, but through their very skin. The water seeped into them, renewing their strength, feeding their bodies with the element they depended on most. Picture the scene. A giant lycophyte tree stands like a green tower, its trunk slick with rain, its roots spread wide in the mud. Around its base, a shallow pool swells as the storm pours down. From the reeds, amphibians crawl forward, their heavy bodies moving with surprising eagerness. They lift their heads into the downpour, eyes half closed, mouths open slightly as droplets strike their slick skin. Each drop shimmers briefly before sliding down their bodies, pooling beneath them, feeding the swamp anew. What to us might seem a stormy inconvenience was, to them, an act of grace. As the rains continued, the forest itself seemed to sing. The patter of water on broad leaves created a constant rhythm, 1,000 tiny drums beating in unison. Streams swelled and overflowed, their currents washing away old debris and carrying new nutrients into the pools. Spores, shaken loose by the downpour, drifted like fine mist across the wet air, spreading the life of ferns and mosses to new corners of the forest. Insects buzzed low and heavy, their wings weighted with droplets as amphibians feasted on their slowed flight. It was a time of abundance, of nourishment, of renewal. When the storm began to fade, the swamp transformed again. Mist rose in great waves from the ground, curling through trunks and reeds, clinging to the air like smoke from an unseen fire. The pools gleamed brighter now, refreshed and full, their surfaces rippling as tadpoles flicked joyfully in the renewed waters. Amphibians lingered in the shallows, basking in the cool dampness left behind, their skin darkened and shining. The forest smelled of rain, earthy, rich, full of promise. Every corner seemed alive with possibility. Imagine yourself standing there in the hush that follows a storm. The last drops fall from the fronds above, landing with soft splashes at your feet. The air is thick, warm, and fragrant, carrying the scent of wet soil and fresh growth. Around you, amphibians stir, moving more freely now, emboldened by the gift of the rain. You watch as one slips quietly into a swollen stream, its wide body gliding easily into the current, vanishing into the reeds. Another remains at the edge of a pond, tilting its head toward the sky, its body rising and falling in slow breaths as if in gratitude. For amphibians, the cycle of rain was the cycle of life. Without water, their eggs withered, their skins cracked, their bodies faltered. With water, they thrived, renewed with every storm. The rains kept the swamps alive, and the swamps kept amphibians alive in turn. It was a partnership older than memory, older than land itself, a covenant between sky and soil, fulfilled drop by drop, storm by storm. And so each rainfall was not merely weather, but ritual, a gift, a renewal, a promise. The amphibians sang more loudly after storms, their voices echoing across freshened pools, weaving joy into the night chorus. The swamp breathed more deeply, its air thick with mist, its soil soft with new water. The age of amphibians moved forward not only in steps and breaths, but in storms, in the timeless cycle of rain and renewal. The swamps of the Carboniferous were vast and tangled, a world of water and green woven together in endless patterns. To the eye, it may have seemed like chaos, towering lycophytes pressing upward, ferns sprawling in every direction, roots coiling through the damp soil, mosses spreading like thick carpets across the forest floor. Yet within this dense labyrinth, amphibians found their own quiet order. They made paths, not in the way of roads paved by human hands, but in the subtle, patient trails of movement repeated over generations. These were the forest highways, hidden, winding routes that carried them between water and land, shelter and feeding ground, night and day. Picture the forest floor after a heavy rain. The earth is soft, spongy beneath the weight of countless layers of decaying plants. Fallen fronds lie crisscrossed in the mud, their broad leaves slowly dissolving into the soil. Between them, amphibians move with deliberate care, their heavy bodies pressing impressions into the moss, their limbs dragging across roots and reeds. One path might lead from a pond's edge into the shaded shelter of a hollow log. Another winds between reeds toward a patch of moss where insects gather in abundance. Over time, these trails deepen, worn by the slow persistence of bodies moving the same way, night after night, year after year. These highways were not marked by signs or signals. They were traced in memory, in instinct, in the scent of dampness carried by the air. Amphibians followed them with ease, as though guided by the whispers of the forest itself. Each path was a thread connecting the scattered pieces of their world, water to land, rest to hunt, night to dawn. The swamp may have seemed endless, but to its inhabitants it was mapped by these quiet routes, etched into soil and shadow. Along these highways, the amphibians found safety. The cover of ferns shielded them from the eyes of predators, while the tangle of roots offered quick retreats into water. The spongy ground, rich with moss and decay, held the moisture they needed, keeping their skin damp as they traveled between pools. Even the air seemed to guide them, carrying familiar scents that drifted across the forest, the smell of wet soil after rain, the faint musk of other amphibians lingering where trails crossed. Each step was cautious, deliberate, yet part of a rhythm older than memory. Imagine crouching low among the reeds, watching a trail unfold before you. The moss is pressed flat where bodies have passed, the soil marked with shallow impressions where limbs once pressed down. In the distance, you hear the faint splash of water, the croak of amphibians calling, guiding you toward the pools they inhabit. You follow the path, ducking beneath the arch of fallen fronds, stepping carefully across roots slick with moss. The air is thick and damp, carrying the low hum of insects and the faint rustle of something moving just ahead. You are walking on the amphibians' road, their secret highway through the heart of the swamp. At night, these trails glowed with life. Fireflies drifted above them like lanterns, their greenish lights winking in slow patterns. Mist pooled low to the ground, curling around the bodies of amphibians as they moved silently between water and forest. Their wide eyes caught the moonlight, gleaming briefly before vanishing into shadow. The forest floor, though tangled and dense, became alive with quiet movement, a hidden network of journeys that only patience could reveal. These highways were not only practical but symbolic. They showed that amphibians had not only survived on land, but had begun to inhabit it fully, to shape it in their own quiet way. They did not build cities or towers, but their presence left marks all the same: impressions in the moss, trails pressed into the soil, subtle paths winding through the ancient green. And for the creatures that followed, reptiles, mammals, and eventually us, these were the first steps toward making the land a home. The amphibians' highways remind us that progress is not always loud or monumental. Sometimes it is traced in the smallest of ways: a trail worn into the moss, a path carved not by conquest but by persistence. These roads, winding through the ancient swamps, carried the amphibians from one world to another, linking water and land, shadow and light. They were the lifelines of the Carboniferous, etched in patience, walked in silence, remembered by none but the forest itself. In the Carboniferous swamps, not every story was told through movement. Some of the most powerful tales were written in silence, in patience, in stillness that stretched across hours and days. The amphibians, those marshland giants, were masters not only of ambush and survival, but of rest. Their strength lay not in constant activity, but in their ability to merge with the landscape, to vanish into shadow and water, to become part of the swamp itself. Picture the scene: beneath a towering lycophyte, where its massive roots arch into the soil like the ribs of some great cathedral, lies a pool shaded from the sun. In that pool, half in water and half on land, rests a giant amphibian. Its wide body sprawls across the mud, its head resting flat, eyes peering forward without blinking. At first, you might not even notice it. Its mottled skin, streaks of green, brown, and gray, blends seamlessly with the reeds and shadows. It looks like driftwood or a moss-covered stone. Only when its sides rise and fall with slow, deliberate breaths does its presence reveal itself. Hours may pass like this. Insects buzz and dart above the water. Dragonflies skim the surface. Millipedes crawl through the damp moss nearby, yet the amphibian does not move. Its patience is infinite, its presence unshakable. It knows the swamp provides, and it wastes no energy chasing what will in time come to it. Stillness is not weakness here. It is power, a strategy as old as life itself. From stillness, the amphibian gains safety. Predators searching for movement pass it by, mistaking it for shadow or stone. Prey too draws near, comforted by its lack of motion, unaware of the sudden strength coiled within those resting limbs. But hunting is only one purpose of this silence. Rest itself is survival. In conserving energy, the amphibian endures. It saves its strength for when it is most needed, for sudden strikes, for rare journeys across the forest floor, for the demands of transformation when it returns to the water to breed. Imagine sitting nearby, leaning against the damp trunk of a tree, watching this creature at rest. The swamp hums around you, the low chorus of amphibian calls, the patter of droplets falling from leaves, the rustle of insects in the undergrowth. Yet the amphibian remains still, as if it has dissolved into the background. You feel its presence not in movement, but in weight, in quiet authority, as though the swamp itself has taken form in flesh beside you. The sunlight shifts overhead, beams piercing the canopy to scatter across the water. For a moment, light dances across the amphibian's eyes, turning them to liquid gold. It does not blink, does not stir. The light fades, and the shadow returns. Time seems to move differently here, slower, more deliberate. In this moment, you begin to understand the lesson of stillness, that life is not always about motion, that sometimes the deepest strength lies in patience, in waiting, in blending with the rhythms of the world. Night falls and the amphibian has barely moved. It shifts slightly, adjusting its weight, sliding deeper into the pool until only its eyes remain above the surface. Mist gathers in thick veils, cloaking the forest floor, muffling sound. The amphibian becomes part of that mist, part of the water, part of the shadows that stretch endlessly through the swamp. Its silence is profound, almost sacred, as though it carries within it the memory of ages before land was ever claimed. The giants of stillness remind us that survival is not always loud or dramatic. It is not always marked by action or conquest. Sometimes it is written in the patience of a body that waits, in the rhythm of breaths taken slowly and deliberately, in the choice to blend rather than to fight. These amphibians ruled their world not by speed, but by presence. In their stillness, they were sovereigns. And so the swamp, too, seemed to rest with them. Its waters hushed, its ferns bowed gently in the breeze, its chorus softened into a lull. The amphibians lay motionless beneath the canopy, guardians of silence, keepers of patience, giants of stillness in a world that asked them for nothing more than to endure. Silence ruled the swamps during the long hours of day, broken only by the hum of insects, the rustle of fronds, the splash of bodies moving quietly in water. But when night unfurled its cool veil and mist rose thick among the trees, another sound began to emerge. Low at first, almost imperceptible, a vibration in the air, a hum beneath the breath of the swamp. Then another joined it, and another, until the forest was alive with voices. These were the amphibians, calling into the darkness, their songs drifting across the water like whispers from another world. Their voices were not yet the sharp trills and bright croaks of modern frogs. These were older, deeper, more resonant tones, throaty hums, low bellows, rhythmic pulses that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the swamp. Some calls were drawn out and sonorous, echoing like the moan of distant wind. Others were short and pulsing, repeated in patterns that carried across reeds and pools. Each amphibian had its own voice, its own rhythm, but together they formed a chorus, a living symphony that wove through the night air. To stand at the edge of a carboniferous swamp on such a night was to feel surrounded by music. The calls rose and fell, overlapping and intertwining, carried by the mist, until it was impossible to tell where one voice ended and another began. The swamp became an instrument, its air thick with sound, its pools echoing with resonance. The chorus was not chaotic, but harmonious in its own way, each voice a thread woven into the larger fabric of the night. These songs had purpose. They were not idle notes, but signals, invitations to mates, declarations of presence, warnings to rivals. For amphibians, sound was survival. Their calls carried through darkness, across water and reed, reaching ears that eyes could not see. In a world of shadows and mist, voice became their bridge, their way of speaking into the unseen. To call was to exist, to carve a space in the vastness of the swamp and say, "I am here." Imagine yourself crouched in the shadows, the damp moss cool beneath your hands, listening. The night is heavy with mist, the stars dimmed by the rising fog. Then it begins, a low, resonant bellow from somewhere across the pond. It hums deep in your chest, vibrating through the air like the low note of a great drum. A moment later, another voice answers from nearby, shorter, pulsing, insistent. Soon more join, until you are surrounded by sound, the forest transformed into a choir of ancient voices. You feel the calls reverberate in your bones, a music older than memory, primal and alive. The songs wove more than communication, they wove community. Each amphibian's voice became part of a greater whole, a chorus that strengthened the presence of the species across the swamp. Together, they were louder than anyone could be alone. Together, they filled the night with sound, a collective declaration that the amphibians were not just survivors, but inhabitants, rightful dwellers of this new world. Their calls were the voice of the Carboniferous itself, breathed out through lungs that had only recently learned the language of air. There was beauty in it too, not beauty as we think of today, with harmonies measured and melodies composed, but beauty born of resonance, the way the calls rose into the mist and lingered, the way they echoed across water, the way they seemed to blend with the rhythm of the swamp itself. The patter of droplets falling from leaves, the hum of insects, the distant splash of movement, all became part of the music. The swamp at night was not silent, but symphonic, alive with notes sung by creatures who had only just begun to find their voices. And perhaps in those deep, resonant calls, the first seeds of song as we know it were sown. The amphibians sang not just for survival, but because they could. They sang because the night answered them back, because the swamp carried their voices, because to breathe air was also, in some small way, to shape it into sound. The age of amphibians was not only an age of stillness and patience, but of voices lifted into darkness, weaving a tapestry of sound that carried across millennia. In their calls, the amphibians announced themselves as more than pioneers of land. They became poets of the night, singers of the first songs that drifted across Earth's green and shadowed forests. Not all of amphibian life was played out in the open pools and sun-dappled swamps. For every moment spent basking in rain or waiting patiently in reeds, there were hours, even days, where survival meant retreat. The forests of the Carboniferous were rich, but they were also unpredictable. Storms could flood pools, heat could dry them, and predators prowled both water and sky. To endure, amphibians sought refuge in the quiet, shadowed spaces of their world. Hollow logs, damp burrows, shaded caves, these became their allies, places where life could pause, where breath could steady, where the body could rest. Picture a fallen lycophyte, a giant of its time, its trunk as thick as a house beam, toppled by storm or age. Its wood, spongy and damp, slowly rots into the earth, its hollow interior forming a tunnel dark and safe. Within that hollow, an amphibian rests. Its wide body presses against the cool, moist walls, its sides rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths. Outside, rain pours in sheets, soaking the forest floor, but within the log, all is still. The amphibian does not move. It does not need to. The shelter holds it, cradles it, until the storm has passed. These refuges were more than hiding places, they were sanctuaries. In burrows dug into soft, wet soil, amphibians pressed themselves against the cool mud, their bodies drinking in moisture. Some shared these burrows with insects or millipedes, quiet neighbors bound together by the same need for shelter. In caves carved by water through stone, amphibians lingered in the darkness, their eyes reflecting faint glimmers of light like tiny lanterns. The shadows shielded them from drying winds, from the gaze of predators, from the burning of sun that sometimes pierced the swamp's mist. Imagine walking the Carboniferous forest at night. Mist curls low, silver in the moonlight, and the air is filled with the low hum of insect wings. You step over a tangle of roots and notice a hollow beneath them, a dark gap no wider than your arm. Peer inside and you see them, a pair of eyes wide and steady, glowing faintly in the gloom. The amphibian does not stir. It is content in its refuge, its body pressed into damp earth, its stillness a form of trust in the shadow's embrace. You draw back, leaving it undisturbed, and the forest swallows you again. In these shelters, amphibians found more than safety, they found rhythm. By day, they might retreat into burrows to conserve moisture, emerging only when the air cooled with evening. By night, they might rest in the damp hollows of fallen logs after long hours of feeding, their bodies cradled by decaying wood. Shelter was part of their cycle, as vital as feeding or breeding. Without it, their soft, permeable skins would fail, their lives too fragile for the harsher edges of their world. The shadows were allies in another way too. They allowed amphibians to disappear. In a forest alive with eyes and wings and hungry mouths, to vanish was to survive. To sink into the cool darkness of a cave, to blend into the rotting heart of a fallen tree, to become just another shadow among the countless others, these were acts of defense as much as rest. Stillness in shadow became not only safety, but strategy. And so across the Carboniferous swamps, the amphibians learned to live with their allies in shadow. They were not builders of nests, not architects of shelters, but they knew how to find what the forest offered, to make homes in hollows, to carve burrows in mud, to rest in the embrace of the earth itself. Their lives were not lived in constant action, but in cycles of emergence and retreat, of calling into the night and sinking back into silence. The age of amphibians was not only an age of movement and song, but of rest and refuge. The shadows of caves, the hollows of logs, the cool damp of the earth, these were as much their kingdom as the pools and reeds. In those hidden spaces, they endured, they persisted, they dreamed in stillness, their quiet bodies pressed against the very fabric of the world. For a long while, amphibians had ruled the swampy kingdom with patience and silence. their lives written in water and shadow. They were the first to breathe the air, the first to walk the soil, the first to lift their voices into the night. Yet even as they thrived, the world was changing. Along the edges of the forests, in places drier, harsher, less forgiving than the soft embrace of the swamps, new creatures began to stir. They were smaller at first, less imposing than the broad, hulking amphibians, but they carried within them something that would shift the balance of ages. These were the reptiles, the rivals of the forest edge. Reptiles were different. Their skins were tougher, drier, less thirsty for the constant caress of water. Where amphibians depended on dampness, slipping back into ponds to moisten their delicate bodies, reptiles could linger longer on land. Their scales were armor against dryness, their bodies less bound to the cycles of rain and mist. And most importantly, their young no longer needed to be born in water. Their eggs, encased in leathery shells, carried within them their own small reservoirs of life. In this simple change, this miracle of independence, the reptiles found freedom where amphibians found limits. Imagine standing at the boundary between swamp and forest, where the water pools thin and the soil rises firm beneath your feet. To one side stretches the endless green of the amphibians' world, damp, lush, echoing with the calls of night. To the other, drier ground extends beneath tall trunks, the air less saturated, the shadows sharper. It is here that you might glimpse a reptile for the first time, a small, lizard-like body darting quickly across roots, its scales glinting faintly in the light. It moves with a speed and confidence unfamiliar in the amphibian world, pausing only briefly before vanishing into the undergrowth. The amphibians linger nearby, their bodies heavy, their movements deliberate, their eyes reflecting the water they cannot leave behind. They share this world for now, but their differences are profound. Amphibians must return always to pools, to streams, to the cool embrace of shadowed water. Reptiles need no such tether. They can claim ground that amphibians cannot, the dry uplands, the stretches of forest beyond the swamp, the sunlit places where moisture is fleeting. They carry their homes within themselves, in their eggs, in their skins, in their very design. At first there was no conflict. Amphibians remained the lords of the marshes, their voices filling the wetlands with song. Reptiles kept to the drier edges, small and quiet, living in places amphibians could not endure. Yet already, the balance was shifting. For every amphibian that struggled in a drought, waiting for the rain to return, a reptile thrived in the dryness, its body unbothered by the heat. For every egg that withered outside the water's safety, reptile eggs endured in hidden nests, sheltered beneath leaves and soil. Slowly, quietly, without fanfare, the reptiles began to rise. Imagine again the chorus of amphibians at night, their calls resonating across the swamp. Now listen closer, for beneath that music is the faint rustle of scales against leaves, the flicker of movement in shadows beyond the water's edge. The reptiles do not join the song, their voices are silent, but their presence is undeniable. They are patient, waiting not for amphibians to vanish, but for time to hand them the drier lands, the brighter forests, the places where amphibians cannot follow. The age of amphibians was not over, far from it. Their swamps still stretched wide, their numbers still great, their presence still woven into every corner of the Carboniferous. But in the quiet steppes of reptiles, the future was beginning to whisper. The rivals of the forest edge had arrived, and though their time of dominance lay still in the distance, the first notes of change had already been played. The amphibians, for now, carried on as they always had, hunting with patience, singing into the night, sheltering in shadows. Yet the forest edge had new voices, new movements, new possibilities. Life was shifting, slowly and softly, as it always does. And at the border between swamp and dry land, amphibians and reptiles shared the stage, their destinies intertwined, their rivalry only just begun. The Carboniferous swamps were not ruled only from below. The air itself had its monarchs, and they were as strange and wondrous as anything that crawled from the water. Above the reeds, above the pools glimmering with moonlight, vast wings stirred the air with steady, powerful beats. These were the insects of the ancient skis, dragonflies as broad as ravens, their delicate glass-like wings stretched wide in shimmering arcs. To the amphibians resting in shadow, they were both companions and hunters, a reminder that danger could fall from above as easily as it rose from the water. By day, the forest hummed with their presence. The air glittered with motion, flashes of bronze and emerald as dragonflies swept between the shafts of sunlight that pierced the canopy. Their wings, nearly 2 feet across, glowed translucent in the golden light, creating rainbows in their passing. They hovered with grace, as still as hovering spirits, before darting forward with shocking speed. In the span of a breath, they could seize smaller insects mid-flight, their jaws clicking softly as they devoured their prey. To watch them was to witness mastery, precision and strength wrapped in beauty. But for the amphibians below, basking half in water, half on mud, these aerial hunters were more than wonders to behold. They were predators, swift and merciless, capable of seizing smaller amphibians or tadpoles near the water's edge. A shadow would drift across the pool, wings humming like a muted drum, and then silence. The surface would ripple, disturbed by a sudden strike, leaving behind only widening circles where once a life had swum. Other insects joined the chorus of the skis. Mayflies rose in clouds so thick they looked like smoke against the green canopy. Their brief, brilliant lives filled the swamp with abundance, a feast for amphibians who snapped them up with wide mouths and sudden gulps. But where there were mayflies, there were also predators, insects large enough to seize them, and predators larger still to seize the predators. The skis were a chain of survival, no less intricate than the waters below. Imagine sitting in the stillness of a swamp clearing, your gaze tilted upward. The canopy above parts, revealing a slice of sky painted in pale blue. Suddenly, it is crossed by the shadow of a dragonfly, its wings beating slow and steady, its body gliding with effortless control. It hovers for a moment, then tilts forward and dives, vanishing into the green in pursuit of prey. A moment later, the air is filled with the faint crackle of its wings, shimmering in the light as it rises again. Around you, the swamp feels smaller, beneath the vast kingdom of wings above. At night, the skis shifted again. Fireflies rose from the reeds, their bodies pulsing with pale green light. The swamp, already alive with amphibian song, became a lantern-lit theater. Flashes of light drifted lazily in the mist, echoing one another, weaving messages in patterns no human eye could fully decipher. For the amphibians below, the fireflies were harmless companions, a faint glow that mirrored the stars above, a reminder that even darkness could be beautiful. Yet even here, predators moved unseen. Giant dragonflies did not sleep easily. Their wings carried them in silence across the dark pools, hunting insects drawn to the fireflies' faint glow. The amphibians, half in shadow, half in water, watched with wide eyes. They did not fear the fireflies, but they knew better than to ignore the dark shapes that passed overhead. Wings stirring the air in low vibrations felt more than heard. The hunt from above was not constant, but it was ever present. It reminded amphibians that survival meant looking not only to the water's edge, but to the skis themselves. Their world was layered, soil and moss below, water glimmering in the shallows, and above, a living sky of wings, some gentle, some deadly. In this layered world, amphibians learned to move carefully, to rest beneath the shelter of reeds, to blend into the water when shadows passed overhead. The age of amphibians was not theirs alone. The air too had its rulers, and their wings filled the swamp with both wonder and fear. The hunt from above was as much a part of amphibian life as the songs of night or the storms of rain. Together, earth, water, and sky created a world where life thrived in every corner, every layer, every breath. And in that world, amphibians endured, their eyes always lifted to the skis, watchful for the hunters that glided silently above. For millions of years, the amphibians had lived in a world that seemed eternal. The swamps stretched endlessly, the forests breathed with mist and rain, and the cycle of water fed every pond, every pool, every shallow stream. It was a world of plenty, of abundance, of constancy, but the earth does not hold still. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the climate began to shift. The rains came less often, the air grew drier. Pools shrank, forests thinned, and the soft, damp floor of the Carboniferous swamps began to harden beneath the sun. For amphibians, whose very bodies depended on water, the change was profound. Their skin, porous and sensitive, needed constant moisture to thrive. Their eggs, soft and fragile, could only survive in the embrace of ponds and streams. Without the shelter of water, their lives unraveled. And so, as the swamps retreated and the land grew harsher, the amphibians faced a world that no longer seemed as welcoming as before. Imagine walking through a familiar swamp that is no longer the same. The ferns still rise, but their fronds droop in the dry air. The moss underfoot crumbles, no longer soft and spongy but brittle and cracking. Pools that once shimmered with tadpoles are reduced to muddy patches, their surfaces shrinking by the day. The calls of amphibians grow fainter, their voices scattered, their numbers fewer. Where once there was a chorus, now there are only scattered notes, lonely songs carried thinly across the forest. The amphibians adapt as best they can. Some retreat deeper into the remaining pools, huddling together in the cool shadows of reeds. Others burrow into the dampest soils, pressing their bodies into mud to keep from drying. Some venture into caves and hollows, finding shade where water no longer flows. Their survival depends on patience and endurance, on the ability to wait through the dry spells until the rains return. Yet the dry spells grow longer, the rains less certain. The balance is shifting, and with it, the future of life on land. Reptiles, by contrast, thrive. Their eggs, wrapped in protective shells, need no water to survive. Their skins do not dry and crack in the heat. They move with ease across the drier forests, claiming spaces the amphibians cannot follow. While amphibians wait desperately for rain, reptiles stride forward into the new world, unburdened by ties to the pools and ponds. The rivalry that began at the forest's edge now becomes something more, a quiet replacement as reptiles step into a role amphibians cannot hold. Still, the amphibians endure. Imagine a rainy night after weeks of dryness. Clouds gather at last, heavy and dark, and the first drops fall onto cracked soil. The amphibians emerge in celebration, crawling from burrows, sliding into the renewed pools with sighs of relief. Their voices rise again, low and resonant, echoing across the swamp as if to say, "We are still here." For a time, life flourishes again. Eggs shimmer in clusters, tadpoles flicker in the shallows, the chorus swells once more. But when the rains fade, so too does their world, shrinking again until only the strongest, the most adaptable, remain. The shifting climates of the late Carboniferous were not cruel by intent, but they were relentless. Earth's cycles turned, continents drifted, air and water danced to rhythms far beyond the creatures that lived within them. The amphibians, who had once ruled with patience and stillness, found themselves pushed into smaller corners, their reign challenged not by force, but by change itself. And yet there is a beauty in their persistence. Even as the forests dried, even as reptiles claimed the uplands, amphibians remained. They clung to the dampest places, to the pools that survived, to the shaded hollows that still held water. They did not vanish. They endured, carrying forward the story of two worlds, water and land, even when the land no longer seemed to welcome them. The age of amphibians was beginning to dim, but its echoes still lingered. In the shifting climates, in the shrinking swamps, the amphibians whispered their presence, a reminder that even in change, life finds a way to endure. Every step taken by an amphibian upon the damp soil of the Carboniferous was more than a moment of survival. It was a legacy written into the living fabric of Earth. Amphibians were not conquerors, not builders, not loud claimants of dominion, but they were pioneers, and in their quiet way, they opened doors that would never again be closed. They were the first vertebrates to bridge two worlds. Born in water, raised in pools, they carried with them the memory of oceans, the whispers of ancient tides. Yet with lungs that could draw air and limbs that could press into soil, they became creatures of land as well, resting in the shadows of ferns, hunting among roots, lifting their heads to the sky. They embodied possibility, not belonging wholly to either world, yet binding the two together in their very existence. Imagine walking through a swamp at dusk. The amphibians stir around you, their broad bodies sliding into water, their voices humming in low, resonant calls. To the eye, they seem like simple creatures, resting in pools, basking beneath fronds, waiting patiently in reeds. But beneath their stillness lies a revolution. Every breath they take of air, every egg they lay in water, every young tadpole that rises to crawl onto land, each is a thread weaving a bridge from one realm to another. Without amphibians, the story of life would have remained bound to the seas. The forests would have stayed silent of vertebrate footsteps, their moss and soil untouched by the press of limbs. But because of them, because of their willingness to survive in the in-between, land itself became alive. Their calls filled the night, their trails marked the moss, their patience carved paths into the future. They gave the gift of transition. Their bodies, awkward yet resilient, taught evolution the first steps of breathing air, of supporting weight, of enduring dryness. They made mistakes, they faltered, they struggled, but they endured, and in enduring they showed what was possible. From their trials came strength. From their limitations came innovation. They did not know they were laying the foundation for reptiles, for mammals, for birds, for every creature that would ever walk upon the earth. Yet in every breath and every step, they carved that destiny. Picture a young amphibian resting on a mossy bank, its small body trembling with the effort of climbing from water to land. Around it, insects hum, dragonflies sweep through the air, and spores drift lazily in the mist. It pauses, lungs heaving, its gaze lifted toward the towering fronds above. To us, it seems so small, so fragile. And yet within that tiny body lies the seed of everything to come, of reptiles, of mammals, of us. That trembling breath is not only survival, it is a legacy that stretches across hundreds of millions of years. The amphibians were not eternal rulers. Their age would dim, their reign would fade as reptiles claimed the drier lands, but their importance did not end with their decline. Their legacy is not measured in dominance, but in transformation. They proved that life could change, could stretch itself into new forms, could embrace uncertainty and endure. They were the pioneers who first taught the earth to breathe. Even now, their legacy endures in the quiet voices of modern amphibians. The croak of a frog in the twilight, the silent stillness of a salamander in damp soil, these are echoes of the Carboniferous, whispers of the first breaths taken on land. Each one is a reminder that the greatest revolutions in life are often quiet, patient, and gentle. The amphibians' legacy is not only written in fossils or in the bones of their descendants. It is written in the very rhythm of life itself, in the fact that we walk on land, that we breathe air, that we inhabit a world once claimed only by the sea. Their story is our story, their footsteps our inheritance. They were pioneers, and in their stillness, in their patience, in their quiet endurance, they gave us the land. The age of amphibians was not shaped by a single form, a single body, or a single way of life. It was an age of diversity, of countless shapes and sizes moving through the swamps, each carrying its own rhythm of survival. From the smallest salamander-like species hidden in the undergrowth to the great giants that sprawled across mossy banks, amphibians painted the Carboniferous in a living mosaic of possibility. Some were small and delicate, no longer than your hand, their slender bodies slipping silently through the reeds. These amphibians resembled modern salamanders, their limbs short but nimble, their movements precise and graceful. They hunted insects in the shallows, darting quickly with a flick of the head, their lives played out in miniature among the shadows of roots and stones. To sit quietly at the edge of a pool was to see them everywhere, little flashes of motion, tiny lives weaving silently between tadpoles and reeds, unnoticed by all but the patient observer. Others grew to enormous size, broad and heavy-bodied, with skulls wide as shields and jaws lined with teeth sharp enough to grip struggling prey. Species like Amphibians dominated their wetlands, their bodies stretching up to 6 or 7 feet long. Imagine one of these massive creatures lumbering through a marsh, its sides glistening in the mist, its deep-set eyes gleaming in the twilight. It moved slowly, but with purpose, its every step pressing deep impressions into the moss. When it opened its mouth, its breath carried the smell of swamp water and prey, a reminder that even patience can hide power. Between these extremes lay countless other forms. Some were long and eel-like, with bodies that writhed easily through the water, their limbs reduced to small nubs. They lived more like fish than walkers, slipping into crevices and darting through weeds, creatures of shadow that could vanish into the depths in a blink. Others had squat, sturdy bodies, their limbs thick and strong, designed for pushing forward on land. These were the explorers of the forest floor, moving slowly but steadily between pools, pressing their presence into places where water no longer flowed. There were amphibians with ornamented skulls, ridges and grooves that caught the light, perhaps for strength, perhaps for display. There were others with strange, almost alien proportions, wide heads, slender bodies, tails that flicked like whips. Some were hunters, their teeth sharp and curved. Others fed on smaller invertebrates, their mouths better suited to scooping than tearing. Each carried a story of adaptation, of trial and error, of possibility written in flesh and bone. Imagine standing on a mossy rise above a shallow pond, watching this diversity unfold before you. In the water below, tadpoles swarm in clouds, tiny beginnings of countless futures. Small salamander-like amphibians dart between reeds, their movements quick and subtle. Along the edge, a larger body sprawls, its heavy frame pressed into the mud, its eyes unblinking as it waits for prey. Beyond, in the dim light of the forest floor, a giant stirs, pushing its bulk slowly through ferns, its every movement echoing strength. Around them, insects hum, dragonflies sweep, and millipedes crawl, but it is the amphibians who hold the scene, each in its place, each a note in the greater symphony of life. The diversity of amphibians was their strength, their way of exploring every corner of the swamp. No single form defined them. Instead, their age was a gallery, a living exhibition of possibilities. Some stayed close to the water, bound to the cycles of ponds and pools. Others pressed further onto land, testing new habitats, pushing into shadows where reptiles would one day flourish. Together, they created a tapestry so rich, so varied, that to witness it was to glimpse the very heart of evolution itself. And though their forms would fade, though many of these faces would vanish into extinction, their diversity left a mark. It showed that amphibians were not a single experiment but many, not a single step but countless strides in different directions. They were not one path, but a forest of pathways, each leading somewhere new. Some ended, some continued, but all mattered, each shaping the legacy that amphibians carried into the future. The faces of amphibian diversity remind us that progress is never one shape, one story, one destiny. It is many woven together, side by side, forming the great chorus of life. For millions of years, the amphibians had ruled the swamps and forests, their patience, stillness, and songs woven into every shadow of the Carboniferous. They were the pioneers, the lords of twilight pools, the singers of the first night music, yet nothing in nature remains unchanged. Slowly, quietly, the world shifted beneath their feet, and the kingdom of the amphibians began to dim. It did not happen all at once. There was no great battle, no sudden downfall. Instead, decline came like the slow retreat of water after rain, subtle at first, barely noticed, then undeniable. The climate grew drier, the swamps that had stretched endlessly began to shrink, and the once boundless pools that had cradled amphibian eggs dwindled into patches of mud. Their world was unraveling, one drop at a time. The amphibians had always depended on water. Their skins, delicate and thirsty, demanded constant dampness. Their eggs, fragile as pearls, could not survive in the open air. Their lives were tied to the cycles of rain and pond, to the mist of the swamp and the cool shade of moss. As the earth changed, these ties became chains. Where once water was everywhere, now it was scarce, and each dry season lasted longer than the last. Meanwhile, new rivals thrived. Reptiles, once small and quiet at the forest's edge, spread into the drylands with ease. Their eggs, encased in leathery shells, carried their young far from water. Their skin, armored in scales, protected them from the sun's heat and the land's dryness. They were not bound to swamps, not tethered to rain. Where amphibians hesitated, reptiles advanced. Where amphibians waited for the return of water, reptiles pressed forward into a world that no longer needed it. Imagine standing at the edge of a shrinking pond. The water is low, its surface broken by reeds that now tower above it. Amphibians linger at the edges, their bodies pressed into the mud, their voices faint compared to the chorus of ages past. A giant, once ruler of this place, slips slowly into the shallows, its wide head lifting weakly toward the dimming light. Nearby, tadpoles flicker in smaller numbers, their pools threatened by dryness. And then across the clearing, you see movement, a reptile small but swift, darting across the dry ground with confidence. It pauses only briefly, its scales gleaming in the sun, before vanishing into the uplands beyond. The contrast is unmistakable, one world fading, another beginning. The amphibians did not vanish entirely. They lingered in the dampest corners, in caves and hollows where moisture still clung, in rivers that defied the dryness. They sang still, their low voices echoing in the night, but the chorus was thinner now, less certain, more fragile. Each generation carried forward the legacy of survival, but fewer found safe pools, fewer eggs reached adulthood. Their dominance was slipping, their kingdom shrinking. And yet there is a strange beauty in this twilight. The amphibians had done what no others had. They had bridged the gap between sea and soil, water and land. They had opened a door that could never be closed. Even in decline, their presence was profound, a reminder of courage and transformation. Though reptiles began to claim the future, it was amphibians who had given them the path to walk upon. Picture the swamp at sunset, its waters low, its shadows long. The calls of amphibians rise faintly in the distance, mingled with the rustle of reptiles moving through the dry brush. The air is warm, carrying the scent of earth baked by the sun. It feels like an ending, but also like a continuation, the passing of a torch from one lineage to another. The amphibians bow gently out of their age, not with a roar, but with a whisper, their voices lingering in the twilight. The kingdom of amphibians was not destroyed. It was transformed. From their decline came opportunity for others, and from their endurance came a legacy that endures still. Their kingdom may have dimmed, but their story never ended. The age of amphibians may have dimmed, but it never went silent. Though the great swamps receded and the giants of the marsh grew fewer, amphibians did not vanish. Instead, they whispered their survival into the world's quieter corners. Where the land grew drier, they sought the shadows. Where water disappeared, they lingered in what remained. Their story shifted from one of dominance to one of endurance, from rule to resilience. Imagine walking through a carboniferous forest after a long season of dryness. The once lush pools are shrunken, their mud cracked, their reeds yellowed at the tips. The air is heavier now, carrying less of the swamp's perfume and more of the dust of fading leaves. On the surface, it might seem as though amphibians are gone, but if you kneel low, pressing your hand against the dampest patches of moss, you will feel them still. Hidden beneath roots, curled within hollow logs, pressed deep into burrows, the amphibians remain. Their bodies rest in silence, conserving what little moisture and energy they have, waiting for the rain's return. These survivors were smaller, more adaptable than their giant kin. Where once amphibians had sprawled as marshland giants, now salamander-like forms carried their lineage forward, narrow bodies, nimble limbs, and lives closer to the ground. They slipped quietly into niches where reptiles could not easily follow, caves damp with condensation, streams hidden beneath canopies, shaded hollows where water lingered longest. In these secret places, they endured, their presence faint but persistent. Their survival was a story of patience. Some could enter states of dormancy, slowing their hearts, reducing their movements, waiting through the driest spells until the rains returned. Others carried their young in safer ways, lingering longer in water to protect them, or laying eggs in hidden pools sheltered from the sun. Each adaptation was quiet, subtle, not the grand leaps of pioneers, but the careful whispers of creatures determined to endure. Imagine one of these survivors, a small amphibian no longer than your forearm, its body slick with moisture, its eyes wide and luminous in the dim light of a cave. It presses itself against the cool stone, its skin drinking in the condensation that gathers there. Its breaths are shallow, deliberate, its body conserving every ounce of energy. Days pass in stillness, the world outside harsher and drier, but within the cave, it endures. Then, at last, the rains come again, and with the first trickle of water seeping into the cave, the amphibian stirs, sliding forward to greet the renewed world. These whispers of adaptation were not only survival strategies, they were acts of defiance. Even as reptiles claimed the uplands and forests, amphibians refused to vanish. They shrank, they shifted, they yielded ground, but they did not surrender the story they had begun. They clung to the edges, to the shadows, to the secret corners where life often hides its most enduring treasures. And in time, their persistence became legacy. For though their age of dominance was over, their line would continue through the ages, branching and diverging, giving rise to the frogs that sing at twilight, the salamanders that slip silently through moss, the Sicilians that burrow unseen beneath soil. Each one is a whisper carried from the Carboniferous, a memory of the first steps onto land, a reminder that adaptation is the quiet power of survival. So when you hear the croak of a frog after rain, or glimpse a salamander in the damp leaf litter of a modern forest, remember, these are not just creatures of today. They are echoes of the whispers that began in a world growing dry, when amphibians clung to life in caves, burrows, and hidden pools. They are survivors, carrying forward the story of endurance written in whispers of adaptation. Step softly. The ground beneath your feet is damp, springy with layers of moss and the slow decay of fallen fronds. The air is heavy, almost liquid in its thickness, each breath filled with the scent of wet earth, of green growth, of life in constant renewal. Above you, the towering trunks of lycophytes rise like columns in a living temple, their diamond-patterned bark glowing faintly in the slanting beams of light. The forest canopy stretches high overhead, weaving a ceiling of fern fronds that filter the sunlight into soft, shifting mosaics. You are walking in the Carboniferous, a world that hums with echoes, a world alive in every shadow. Listen, the swamp is never silent. Dragonflies, their wings as broad as your hand, skim through the air with a low, steady thrum, their bodies flashing bronze and green in the filtered light. Beetles click softly as they move through the undergrowth, while giant millipedes trundle slowly across the forest floor, their countless legs rippling in hypnotic waves. Above, spores drift gently from fern fronds, swirling like dust motes in a cathedral, carried on currents of air you cannot see. And beneath it all, the low murmur of amphibian voices rises and falls, resonant and steady, blending with the heartbeat of the swamp. At the edge of a pool you pause. The water is dark, its surface broken only by ripples spreading outward in concentric rings. You kneel, brushing aside reeds, and peer into the stillness. Wide eyes gaze back at you, unblinking, luminous in the dim light. An amphibian rests there, half in water, half on land, its mottled skin blending with mud and shadow. It does not move, but its presence is undeniable, a quiet guardian of the swamp, a creature older than any forest. A moment later, it exhales, sending a soft ripple across the water, then settles again into stillness. You rise and move deeper beneath the ferns. The ground here is cooler, shaded by thick moss and tangled roots. As you step, you hear the faint rustle of movement. Something slender and eel-like slips across the mud, vanishing beneath a fallen log. Another amphibian, smaller, salamander-like, clambers slowly across a root, its limbs pressing delicately into the damp bark. Its skin glistens, its eyes wide, its breath shallow but steady. You pause to watch it, marveling at its fragility, its persistence. It does not notice you. It belongs here, woven into the tapestry of ferns and shadows. The air grows thicker as mist begins to rise, curling low along the forest floor. Shafts of sunlight pierce the canopy in golden columns, illuminating swirls of spores and the occasional glint of dragonfly wings. The swamp feels alive, breathing with you, its rhythm slow and patient, its heartbeat steady. And everywhere you sense the amphibians, in the pools where tadpoles flicker, in the burrows beneath roots, in the hollows of fallen trees. Their presence lingers in every corner, quiet yet constant, like echoes beneath the ferns. Imagine pausing now, closing your eyes. The sounds swell around you, the hum of insects, the soft drip of water, the low chorus of amphibian calls resonating through the mist. The air presses gently against your skin, damp and cool, carrying the scents of moss, mud, and rain-soaked wood. At this moment, time dissolves. You are no longer separate from the swamp. You are part of it, breathing with it, listening to its whispers, sharing its stillness. When you open your eyes again, the forest seems to watch you. The wide eyes of amphibians peer from water and shadow, their gazes steady, unafraid. They do not flee, for you are not intruder but companion, another presence walking softly beneath the ferns. The swamp accepts you, just as it accepted them, just as it nurtured their first breaths, their first steps, their long endurance. These are the echoes that linger still, not just the sound of amphibian voices, but the memory of a world that breathed green, a world that cradled pioneers in its damp embrace. Beneath the ferns, their story whispers on, timeless and eternal, carried in every drop of water, every drifting spore, every quiet breath of the swamp. The age of amphibians, like every age, was destined to change. For millions of years, they had thrived in the warm, humid embrace of the Carboniferous swamps. Their voices filled the night, their bodies rested in shadowed pools, their young swam in shimmering clouds of tadpoles beneath the reeds. They seemed eternal, as though their kingdom could never end. Yet the earth carries its own rhythms, vast and unrelenting, and even the greatest ages must one day face their twilight. At the close of the Paleozoic, the shadow of extinction began to fall. The climate shifted first, subtly at the beginning. Rains grew less frequent. The vast coal forests, which had once stretched like emerald oceans across the continents, began to thin. What had been swamps teeming with life grew patchy, interrupted by stretches of drier ground. Pools shrank, streams vanished, and the air that had once pressed heavy with moisture grew brittle and sharp. Amphibians, tied to water by skin and egg, felt the change with every breath, every step. Their kingdom of green and water was no longer endless. But climate was not the only shadow. The earth itself trembled with upheaval. Continents drifted and collided, mountains rose, seas receded. The world was rearranging itself on a scale too vast for amphibians to comprehend, yet they bore the cost of its reshaping. As habitats dwindled, so too did their numbers. Where once their calls rose in mighty choruses, now they were scattered, their voices thin, lonely notes in the silence of shrinking swamps. And still the rivals they once tolerated grew stronger. Reptiles, no longer confined to the forest's edge, pressed forward into every new landscape. Their eggs survived in dry soil, their skins resisted the heat, their bodies unshackled from the bonds of water. The drier the world became, the more reptiles flourished. Amphibians retreated into what shadows remained, clinging to caves, rivers, and deep hollows where dampness lingered. Their reign was not ended by tooth or claw, but by change itself, relentless, impartial, absolute. Then, at the very end of the Paleozoic, the world staggered under something even greater. The Permian extinction, a catastrophe beyond imagining, swept across the Earth. Volcanoes roared, skies darkened, seas churned with chaos. The air thickened with ash and gas, the climate veered wildly between extremes. Life itself faltered, countless species vanished forever. The amphibians, already in decline, faced devastation. Their fragile skins and water-bound eggs made them vulnerable to every shift, every drought, every poisoned pool. Whole lineages disappeared, their stories ending in silence beneath the weight of catastrophe. And yet they did not vanish. Even as the forests burned, even as rivers dried and skies dimmed, some endured. In quiet corners, in shaded streams, in the last remaining sanctuaries of water, amphibians persisted. They were fewer, smaller, their diversity diminished, but they endured. Their voices, though thinned, still rose into the night. Their young, though fewer, still flicked their tails in shallow pools. Against the shadow of extinction, they whispered survival. Imagine standing in the ruins of a once great swamp. The trees are fewer now, their trunks charred or fallen. The air smells of ash and dust, heavy with the memory of fire. The pools are shallow, their waters clouded, their surfaces broken by only a few ripples. Yet kneel at the edge of one such pool, and you will see them, a cluster of amphibians, smaller now, their bodies slick with moisture, their eyes reflecting determination. They breathe slowly, they move cautiously, but they live. And in their survival, they carry the torch of ages passed into a new and uncertain world. The shadow of extinction could not erase the amphibians' legacy. Though their kingdom fell, though their reign ended, their story endured. They had been the pioneers, the dreamers of two worlds, the singers of the first night songs. And though diminished, their line remained, a thread of life stretched from the deep past into the future, fragile yet unbroken. The twilight of their age was not silence, but transition. The amphibians yielded the world to reptiles, but they did not disappear. They became echoes, survivors, reminders of a time when life first reached out of the water and claimed the land. In their persistence, even beneath the shadow of extinction, they taught the earth that survival is not always strength, but endurance, patience, and quiet resilience. The twilight of the Paleozoic may have dimmed their reign, but amphibians did not vanish into silence. They lingered, they endured, and they carried with them a song that never ceased. It changed, it softened, it grew quieter, yet it survived. From the vast swamps of the Carboniferous to the scattered streams of the Permian, from the shadow of extinction into the dawn of the Mesozoic, amphibians remained, singing their survival in whispers that reached all the way to the present. Their song was not a single note, but a chorus of persistence. In small forest pools, survivors pressed themselves into the mud, waiting through drought until rains returned. In shaded rivers, they lingered in still waters, their bodies slick with moisture, their eyes gleaming in dim light. In hidden caves and mossy hollows, they clung to life, quiet and unseen, their hearts beating patiently through the storms of change. Each breath, each call, each flick of a tail was part of the same song, a melody of endurance that outlasted extinction. Imagine the world after the Permian catastrophe. The forests are thinner, the air carries the scent of dust and ash, and the land feels raw, scarred by upheaval. Yet listen closely, and you will hear it faint but steady. The low hum of amphibian calls rising from a sheltered pond, echoing into the darkness. It is not the thunderous chorus of the Carboniferous, but a softer refrain, a lullaby that carries the memory of an age past. It is the song of survival, fragile but unbroken. As the Mesozoic dawned, reptiles surged forward, claiming the dry lands, the forests, the skies. Dinosaurs rose, vast and powerful, their footsteps shaking the earth. Mammals stirred in the shadows, their time still far ahead. And yet, even beneath the thunder of giants, amphibians continued. Small, unassuming, they lingered in the edges of rivers, in the moss of forests, in the quiet pools hidden beneath roots. Their voices, soft but persistent, drifted into the night, reminders of the pioneers who first sang to the land. Their forms shifted, their numbers dwindled, but their essence endured. Some grew sleek and agile, like salamanders slipping silently through the undergrowth. Others leapt boldly, like frogs whose voices filled the air with new music. Still others burrowed unseen, Sicilians pressing their limbless bodies into the soil, carrying the amphibian legacy deep underground. They adapted, they survived, and in doing so, they carried forward the song of their ancestors. Imagine yourself in the modern world, walking after a summer rain. The air is cool and fresh, the ground soft beneath your feet. In the distance you hear it, the chorus of frogs calling from ponds, their voices overlapping in a joyous rhythmic symphony. Beneath logs, salamanders stir, their moist skin glistening in the damp. In hidden burrows, Sicilians move unseen, there lives a quiet mystery. These are not relics of the past, they are the living survivors of an ancient story. Their voices are the echoes of the Carboniferous, the whispers of the age of amphibians carried across time. The survivors' song is not loud, but it does not need to be. It is patient, persistent, and eternal. It tells of resilience in the face of change, of life's ability to endure even as worlds shift and kingdoms fall. It is the song of pioneers who taught the earth to breathe, who bridged the realms of water and land, who left behind not only fossils, but living descendants that still sing beneath the stars. So the next time you hear the call of a frog at twilight, pause and listen. Hear in it not only the voice of the present, but the echo of millions of years. Hear the whispers of vast swamps, the ripple of ancient pools, the stillness of giants resting beneath ferns. Hear the song of survival, the melody of endurance, the voice of the amphibians who never truly left us. This is their legacy, not conquest, but continuity, not dominance, but endurance. Their kingdom may have faded, but their song endures, threading through the ages, a gentle hymn carried across time. The age of amphibians is long past, but their music is forever. The age of amphibians was a chapter unlike any other in Earth's great story. For millions of years, they thrived in a world of swamps and shadows, where towering ferns and lycophytes rose like living cathedrals, and the air itself shimmered with oxygen-rich abundance. They were not conquerors in the way that later creatures would be. They were pioneers, the first to step from water onto soil, the first to breathe air and sing into the night, the first to show that life could belong to two worlds at once. Their reign was quiet but profound. They hunted with patience, resting in stillness for hours until opportunity came. They sang in low, resonant voices that filled the darkness with music more ancient than any bird's call. They lived in balance with the swamp, dependent on its water, sheltered by its shadows, renewed by its rain. And in their quiet, they changed the earth forever. They opened a doorway that could never again be shut. But like every age, theirs was not eternal. The climate shifted, the swamps shrank, and reptiles rose with skins that did not thirst for water, with eggs that carried life across dry lands. The giants of the marsh grew fewer, their voices softer, their world dimmer. And then came extinction, vast and unforgiving, reshaping the earth in ways that crushed even the mightiest. The amphibians faltered, their kingdom slipping into twilight. And yet they endured. Though their age of dominance ended, their story did not. They whispered survival into caves and hollows, into damp streams and shaded pools. They adapted, they persisted, they carried forward their fragile but unbroken line. Their descendants spread into new shapes, new songs, the croak of frogs after rain, the silent movements of salamanders beneath moss, the secret lives of Sicilians hidden in the soil, each one a living reminder that the amphibians never truly left us. Imagine the Carboniferous swamps once more. The towering ferns, the mist curling low, the stillness broken only by the ripple of water and the hum of insects. Amphibians rest in shadows, their wide eyes glimmering in the half-light. Their voices rise in chorus, echoing across pools and into the night. That sound, soft and patient, still lingers today in every forest pond, every rain-soaked marsh, every twilight chorus that fills the air after storms. The age of amphibians is long past, but its echo is eternal. Their legacy is not one of conquest, but of possibility. They remind us that progress can be quiet, that strength can be found in patience, that the greatest revolutions are not always loud. They were the bridge between water and land, the pioneers who showed life how to step forward. In their stillness, in their song, in their survival, they left a gift that shapes the world even now. So when you hear the croak of a frog beneath the stars, or glimpse the shimmer of a salamander on damp moss, pause for a moment. Listen closely. You are hearing more than just the present. You are hearing the echoes of a kingdom long gone, the whispers of amphibians who first taught the earth to breathe. Their age may have faded, but their story endures, carried softly on the night air, forever part of the great song of time.